Hello, I'm Brad Hepner, the CEO and Chairman of the Beneficient Company Group. Thank you for taking a few minutes to learn more about our company. Beneficient, which we call BEN, was organized with the intent of becoming the bank for alternative asset investors. Our business plan includes providing liquidity and loans to alternative asset investors, custody and trustee services, and third-party fund administration services, along with financial technologies developed solely for the alternative asset investor. With over a $1 billion capitalization, our plan includes operating as other wealth management trust banks do, but with a sole focus on the alternative asset investor. Our business was developed to respond to what we perceive is a real need in the market. Nearly 1 million U.S. alternative asset investors need liquidity, but do not have access to the institutional intermediated market for liquidity that large U.S. institutions have.
Beneficient is the first planned private trust banking platform of its kind. It is disruptive and it is scalable. With BEN's planned non-depository trust company charters and with its proprietary trust products and existing licenses, BEN expects to be able to provide the infrastructure to scale the money flows within the private markets more efficiently and at a structurally lower cost of capital than traditional lenders and secondary liquidity providers.
It's important to note what BEN does not do. BEN is not an investment advisor, we're not an asset manager, we're not a secondary fund, we're not a sponsor of investment funds, and we are not a depository institution. In fact, upon completing our final regulatory process, which we expect to happen during the course of 2018, BEN may best be compared to mid-cap, publicly traded, specialized financial institutions that operate multiple lines of business. BEN operates 3 lines of business. Our first line of business, private trust banking, is expected to represent 70% of our gross revenues, comparable to our mid-cap publicly traded peers, whom we consider include such firms as Boston Private, Bryn Mawr Trust, Signature Bank, and Washington Trust. We intend to dedicate our capital and reinvested earnings to provide loans and full liquidity for our clients through 16 different products offered by our private trust banking division. Our balance sheet as of September 1st, 2017, reflects an average discount of 23% at the time of pricing on the diversified assets we hold. And our company follows an endowment model for diversification of our balance sheet holdings. Our second line of business will focus on service offerings, including services such as custody of alternatives, trustee services and third-party fund administration, directed individual retirement accounts, and insurance services, all focused on alternatives. We expect that the fees we earn from this business will represent approximately 30% of BEN's gross revenues. Service fees are expected to contribute to pre-tax profit margins to cover holding costs and execution costs attendant to our balance sheet portfolio, as our past 3 years of pro forma results have represented. Our third line of business includes proprietary financial technologies and online platforms for originating, underwriting, settling, and monitoring private securities. In 2016, we agreed to purchase the ACE Portal online platform. The New York Stock Exchange had previously financed the ACE Portal to develop a private exchange for alternative asset investors. The ACE Portal is currently adding features in order to satisfy the eligibility requirements for operation as a FINRA-registered private exchange. We're also adding our liquidity products to the ACE Portal, which will then serve as an origination portal for BEN and provide individuals and small institutions direct access to our liquidity products. In doing so, ACE will help to realize BEN's objective of a streamlined and simplified platform for alternative asset investors to apply for and receive liquidity directly from BEN, all online.
Our target clients are the nearly 1 million individual investors having a net worth between $5 million and $30 million. We believe these investors hold around 25% of the outstanding NAV of alternatives, or approximately $681 billion. We also intend to serve approximately 1,000 smaller U.S. institutions with assets less than $1 billion, who we believe hold nearly another 25% of the outstanding NAV in alternative assets of over 7 vintage years. Together, we believe these investors hold nearly 50% of the outstanding net asset value in the United States, or nearly $1.3 trillion, which is about as large as the amount held by the large U.S.-based institutional investors, those with assets over $1 billion each. Today, nearly 82% of all individuals worth over $5 million have invested in professionally managed alternative assets. That's up from 43% just 10 years ago, a 10% compounded annual growth rate in the number of investors.
Individual investors have different needs for liquidity than the large institutional investor. Individuals die or fall ill, some go through divorces. Many are entrepreneurs and business owners that from time to time need their capital returned to invest in their businesses. Individuals experience life events, while institutions carry on. The alternative asset investment and financial services industry has evolved over the past 2 decades to serve the large institutional investors, but it's neglected to provide individuals and smaller institutions the same avenues for liquidity and services. Larger institutions with access to organized and funded markets gain liquidity from their alternative assets each year, an amount estimated to equal just over 2% of their net asset value, excluding uncalled capital. This 2% turn rate has been consistent over the past 10 years and currently represents about $30 billion in aggregate liquidity provided annually to large U.S. institutional investors. This represents a substantial majority of the entire intermediated market for secondary liquidity transactions. In other words, larger institutions, which actually make up only half of the size of the market, currently represent a substantial majority of the transactions. The other half of the market doesn't have the same level of access, and traditional banks aren't permitted by current regulations to address this market. In comparison, Ben's assumption is that the potential turn rate for individuals and small institutions would potentially be in excess of 3% if liquidity was available, and this would represent another $30 billion in demand for liquidity each year. Ben's objective and purpose is to address these two segments, individuals and small institutions, to address their need for liquidity, so those clients can redeploy their funds and keep money moving across the private markets. I spent 10 years as a president and CEO of a Federal Reserve Bank. I recognize the importance of the movement of money between markets, between and within economic cycles. And Ben aspires to be an important contributor to the U.S. economy by serving the alternative asset investor. Ben's infrastructure, its Altiverse as it's called, has been designed to facilitate money flows for individuals and small institutional investors requiring liquidity out of their alternative assets.
We estimate the two segments of institutional and small investors, who are our primary clients, together hold around $1.3 trillion in alternative assets. Ben believes they have limited access to the intermediated secondary market. To efficiently fund this unaddressed demand for liquidity, Ben is focused on 3 structural issues most financing institutions face. First, there's lowering execution costs charged to our clients for securing liquidity from their alternative assets. Ben has worked with state regulators on transaction documents with the goal of reducing associated transaction costs to a level where we believe we will be able to absorb them on behalf of our clients. Second, lowering the holding costs attendant to the assets we finance. Ben's second line of business generates third-party fees for providing custody and trustee services, third-party fund administration, and insurance services. Those fees are structured to cover the holding costs and consequently are expected to contribute to our pre-tax profit margin. We also operate proprietary operations, management, and accounting systems, which we have developed to lower Ben's operating costs. The third and most important structural issue for financing institutions is lowering their cost of capital. Ben's solution is to operate with access to the U.S. equity and debt public markets. Ben intends to finalize the regulatory filings and applications during 2018 that will permit Ben to access the U.S. capital public markets and reduce our company's equity cost of capital, we believe, by as much as half of the equity cost incurred by other providers of liquidity. That's approximately 8.5% compared to 15 to 17% for others based upon the publicly available information.
Like most wealth trust banks, a primary focus of Ben is on improving the spread earned from financing and service fees. Ben's objective behind lowering its cost of capital, along with rationalizing its holding and execution costs of financing, allows us the opportunity to pass some of the savings on to our clients. They benefit from the potentially lower discounts or greater premiums they receive on their net asset value compared to the liquidity provided by secondary funds, lending funds, and private capital companies and institutions who are our competitors. As credit terms loosen and advance rates for liquidity rise, we believe more institutions are likely to seek more liquidity on their alternative asset holdings. Ben's financial assumptions and models suggest that rising advance rates could lead to an increase in demand for liquidity from alternative assets by as much as an additional $24 billion per year. Combined demand could potentially exceed the estimated current level of $60 billion per year of liquidity demand. Our goal is to reduce our cost of capital and lower transaction costs incurred by our clients, thus lowering our operating costs, which means lower holding costs for our financial assets. As a further advantage, we operate utilizing our own proprietary financial technologies, which will become an increasing source of asset origination along with our own existing channels of asset origination. Ben's success in achieving these structural costs will contribute to providing more efficient and cost-effective liquidity to alternative asset investors, which we believe will lead to an expanding market demand for liquidity and Ben's opportunity to fund upwards of 1% of that market demand.
The company's most comparable peer group includes the specialized wealth management trust banks such as Boston Private, Bryn Mawr Trust, Washington Trust, and Signature Bank. Ben operates like its peer group of specialized financing institutions by providing loans and liquidity that generate 70% of our gross revenues from earnings off our financial assets and 30% of our revenues from fee-generating services, a comparable revenue composition to that of our peers. Earnings multiples are a metric used to value specialized wealth management trust banks. Earnings multiples are used because these specialized peers are ongoing operating companies with permanent capital, fee-generating businesses, internal executive management, proprietary financial technologies, branded financial lending and liquidity products, and with channels of origination for sourcing the financing to clients. Most importantly, we intend to invest our earnings to facilitate our growth rate. Managing our growth rate provides an avenue for producing a more predictable and repeatable return on equity, which we believe is highly correlated to an earnings multiple. Unlike secondary funds and lending funds, operating companies reinvest their earnings to drive future growth. As a result, Ben does not expect to be valued based on its portfolio of assets, as are secondary pools of assets and funds, and often at discounts to their net asset value. Ben, as a fully chartered operating company, expects to carry a valuation based on its expected forward-looking earnings, which currently range from 14 to 15 multiples for its expected peer group. We expect this to drive a premium price to tangible book value multiples.
Ben's indicative valuation would be based on a 25% discount to a 14.5 median forward-looking earnings multiple of our expected peer group. That will drive an indicative valuation of just over 1.4 price to tangible book. In other words, Ben should be valued at a premium to its tangible assets, consistent with being valued as a fully chartered operating company. This valuation premium represents our management and our board's considered judgment of what Ben will strive to achieve.
Thank you for your time and attention.
In 2005, a financial advisor recommended I put a portion of my investments in illiquid alternative assets. It seemed reasonable. It made sense, and I did that. But sometimes things happen. Times change. Circumstances change. And now I want my money out. If your financial plan includes illiquid alternative assets, private equity, hedge funds, real estate, you may be wishing you could get your money out. Beneficient Trust Company can help you do that. They have products that give you liquidity. Call your financial advisor and ask about Ben.